Well, good morning, everybody, and I have an exciting story to share with you this morning, and I'm happy to be back with you and to talk to you about the modern story of creation. Last week, Tom talked about the importance of stories in our lives. We've used stories to enrich our lives for millennia, long before we invented the writing in ancient Sumer about 3,200 BCE. We used oral tradition for years to pass history and cultural tradition from generation to generation. As human beings, we've always required stories to tell us who we are, stories to give life meaning and direction. Some say this is even in our DNA. Some of our stories we consider sacred, stories that have deep meaning that span millennia of human history and contain eternal truth. They are stories that speak to us not only at the intellectual level, but also at an emotional and spiritual level. Today I want to begin a story about miracles. Now, some of us believe in miracles and some of us don't. I want to present a story of a miracle this morning, a miracle that everyone can believe in and embrace. The story we will explore these next few weeks is one that can only take your breath away. It's a story that can both inspire the atheist and also the deeply religious. It's a story that will challenge us to rethink what we believe and what we hold true. It's our story, a story that defines all of us. But before I tell you the story, I want to warn you about at least two compelling characteristics of our new story. First, the one constant in our story is that of change. Change is everywhere, eternal, and ongoing. The Buddhists say that the only thing we can count on is change. The other characteristic to watch for in this universe is the universe's mystical ability to emerge new things from old things, to fashion complex things from simple things. Watch out for this. Albert Einstein was a remarkable man in so many ways, and I want to offer his quotation to start my part of the exploration of our cosmic evolution. He says there are only two ways to live your life. One is as though nothing is a miracle. The other is though everything is a miracle. In the early 21st century, we are entering a new time with a new evolving story for how we came to be. For the past 2 decades, we've been piecing together a new story, a new account of our evolution. For the first time in human history, we can now lay this story out, a story rooted not in speculation or belief, but a story rooted in empirical observations and new detail. Toulmin and Goodfield say in the whole history of human thought, no transformation in attitudes toward nature is more profound than the change in perspective brought about by discovery of the past. This new story invites us to change our perspective on our world and ourselves. It's a coherent story telling a coherent tale of our history. It suggests a way forward for us to live in a universe whose unfolding story we are now beginning to understand. This new understanding raises the question of how we live in this knowledge. It was my experience that when I was able to internalize this story, I had a powerful spiritual experience that changed the way I saw my world in my own life, and I hope I can share this with you today and next week. This is an ancient hymn called the Rig Veda. There was neither non-existence nor existence then. There was neither the realm of space nor the sky which is beyond. What stirred? Where? In whose protection? Was there water bottomlessly deep? There was neither death nor immortality then. There was no distinguishing sign of night nor of day. That one breathed, windless by its own impulse. Other than that, there was nothing beyond. Darkness was hidden by darkness in the beginning, with no distinguishing sign. All this was water. The life force that was covered with emptiness, that one arose through the power of heat. Desire came upon that one in the beginning. That was the first seed of mind. Poets seeking in their heart with wisdom found the bond of existence and non-existence. The Rig Veda is one of the earliest recorded creation stories, recorded 1,000 to 1,500 years before our Hebrew Torah or Old Testament was set to writing. It's an ancient Indian sacred collection of Vedic Sanskrit hymns, and it contained this beautiful poem describing the creation. The Rig Veda dates between 1700 and 1100 BCE. It's a powerful and mystical poetic description of the creation as understood by that ancient culture in India. Yet it beautifully captures the wonder, the mystery, and the power of the cosmic creation. Human beings from the dawn of history have tried to make sense of who they were and how they came to be. Tom will talk later about how the human mind works, and we will see that to maintain sanity, we long ago evolved a brain that constantly tries to make sense of our surroundings. Every culture has its own creation story, and each culture fashions its story around the environment the culture lived in. Each culture used oral tradition to propagate these stories from generation to generation. For example, the Jicarilla Apaches told a story that was filled with dry deserts underlain by dry caverns, but had little mention of oceans, lakes, or water. Monotheism had its roots in India, Samaria, and Egypt, but let us focus on the Abrahamic God familiar to most of us. Somewhere in what was then called Canaan, about 4,000 years ago, or about 150 generations in the past, in the late Bronze Age, a group was sitting around a campfire telling stories. Stories handed down from the mist of time through oral tradition. The sky was ablaze with stars and constellations. In contrast to most of us in this room, ancient man lived close to nature. Stars, the sun, the moon, the planets, animals, plants, all the natural creatures formed the world of the late Bronze Age. To make sense of this world, the story of our creation was based on the best wisdom available. The elder in the group begins the old story that was handed down to us today. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he goes on to tell how everything, including us, came to be. Before monotheism, there were creation stories attributed to other sacred beings, sometimes gods from the sky, sometimes nature gods. But this story has been our sacred story in the Abrahamic traditions for 4 millennia or more. It was finally written down around 560 BCE, somewhere in what was then Babylon. It has been our sacred story, and it continues to be. The ancient Hebrews, our forefathers, told a story about a beginning in a lush green garden, more in keeping with the green oases of their day, rather than the stark contrast of the dry desert that was most of their homeland. Our sacred story has continued to evolve, and in the last 20 years we have enough knowledge that we can put together a detailed account of a major addition to the old creation story. Let's return now to the present and hear that story. E.O. Wilson says the evolutionary epic is probably the best myth that we will ever have. In the beginning of our universe, according to the current dominant theory, there was nothing. There was no void, no vacuum, not even time and space. There was no before because there was no time. There was no observing this event because there was nothing outside the space that was being created. 13.8 billion years ago, all the energy and matter that would ever exist in our universe erupted as a single quantum, a singular gift, existence. In a tiny, tiny fraction of a second, the universe inflated from the size of an atom to the size of a galaxy. Space and time themselves were instantly created. All the matter and energy that was ever to be expressed was expressed in this singular event. We know this event today, or we call it the Big Bang. In that instant, every fundamental particle that exists in this room, this state, this country, this planet, the entire universe came into being. Very little of this early matter survived. Only 1/1000th of the original matter remains in our universe. The rest converted to various forms of energy. One of the great mysteries today is why some matter survived and why there is something rather than nothing. It is one of several of the great remaining mysteries of this wondrous 21st century story. How do we know about the Big Bang? Well, in the 1960s, there were two Bell Labs engineers who were setting up a receiver to try and receive signals from outer space. They couldn't get their apparatus to work. They had too much noise in the receiver. What they discovered was that they were hearing the microwave energy from the Big Bang, the remnants of all that particle annihilation that took place almost 14 billion years ago. For this discovery, they got the Nobel Prize in 1978. How did the universe start? What kicked it off? The short answer is we don't know, and it's possible we will never know. This is another of the great mysteries. Without elaborating at this point, the current theories are A, that the universe was created from a random event, B, that our 3D universe is created from a higher dimensional universe that we cannot observe, or C, that universes have been created an infinite number of times and we just live in one of those creations. Now, these concepts all seem strange to us because at our present state of evolution, we are not equipped to understand or visualize these ideas. I want to take a moment and talk about the amazing universe that we all take for granted. We all understand the three dimensions of time, of space. There's up and down, left and right, and forward backwards, the three spatial dimensions. But what is this thing called time? It seems only to run in one direction, and that's forward. Why? Most physical principles are symmetric. They have plus and minus counterparts. Physicists don't know why time runs in only one direction. Oh, and what I just said, that's been related to the past, never to be reenacted. Yes, we can record my voice or my picture, and these are all feeble attempts to stop time, but we can never experience the past again. And that lunch you're thinking about right now, it's in the future. We don't know if you'll get the menu you crave or you'll get something else. Or we may be all struck down by a meteor before lunch. That's the mysterious future. The fact is, we live on a knife edge of time, the not past and the not future of the moment, the now, 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 now. Ancient philosophers recognized this fact and built compelling religious philosophies around living in the moment, being acutely conscious of savoring the moment and not becoming distracted with the past or the future. And oh, by the way, right now we're all moving through the time dimension at the speed of light. But I won't say more about that this morning. That whole issue of time is worth several sessions of study, but we have our story to tell and we have to move on at this point. The laws of physics we know and take for granted appear to have been created when the Big Bang happened, and as far as we know, they have not changed since. Further, they're the same over the entire universe. Here are the pictures of two giants of science, Isaac Newton on the right and Albert Einstein on the left. Newton's discovery of the laws of motion and his contributions in mathematics changed the world forever. It was Newton's laws of motion that took the first astronauts to the moon and back, not Einstein's theories. In the 20th century, Albert Einstein stunned the physics world with his redefinition of space-time, and today his theories are still confirmed by experiments. It took 380,000 years for the Big Bang fireball to cool enough that the very first atoms could form. The first atoms were hydrogen and helium. None of the other elements in our atomic chart existed at that time. The universe had cooled and become dark, transformed into a trillion clouds of the only two atoms of that early universe, hydrogen and helium. The universe had entered its dark ages. This timeline, the green line, represents the 13.8 billion years since the Big Bang. The first atoms and the first stars occurred on this timeline so close to the origin they cannot be represented. As the clouds contracted with more and more of a dense core, the hydrogen atoms, under intense pressure and heat, began to fuse into helium atoms. This took about 100 million years. Nuclear fusion in stars takes place the same way our present-day fusion-based atomic bombs work. In the intense heat and pressure of at the core of the star, the lighter elements being formed are burned, and heavier elements like iron, silicon, and so forth are formed through nuclear fusion. The first stars slowly coalesced into the first galaxies. Something called dark matter played a lead role in the formation of the very first stars. Now we clearly see the process we call emergence that I referred to earlier, the making of something more from nothing but. Emergence is the mysterious property of the universe that creates something new and different from smaller parts. The formation of atoms from fundamental particles was a small step in complexity. The universe is now taking the next step. The early universe was simple, consisting of just two atoms, hydrogen and helium. Stars, which are still rather simple in concept, are a step toward increasing complexity. Let's recap for just a moment. Energy has been converted into matter, atoms, and these atoms have been collected into stars. The stars then convert simple atoms to more complex ones. Emergence will continue to shape the evolving universe as our story goes on. One major unsolved mystery of the universe story is, what is dark matter and what is dark energy? We know that because of the way the galaxies move, there's some kind of matter out in space that is exerting a kind of gravity on them, but we cannot not observe this matter with our telescopes because it doesn't create light photons. Likewise, because we now know from the Hubble telescope observations that the universe is not only expanding, it is accelerating in expansion. We've known that since 1998, actually. There's some kind of unobserved energy in space that is driving the expansion. The red and blue in this slide show the calculated presence of dark energy and dark matter. Whatever dark energy and dark matter are, they make up most of the universe, and the matter we can observe in the universe is but a small percentage of the total, less than 5%. We still don't know what these mysterious forms are, but there are currently a number of experiments taking place to try to figure out what dark matter is. We shall see. This is our home right there, the Milky Way, and there our solar system is. Oops, sorry. Here's some figures that will blow your mind about the Milky Way. It's 100,000 light years across, meaning it would take 100,000 years traveling at the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, or 671 million miles per hour, to travel across the Milky Way. This is an unimaginable distance. It's about 6 trillion miles. And let's talk about scale for a second. Suppose you have an airliner going 500 miles an hour. It will take 5 hours for this aircraft to travel coast to coast in the U.S. It would take 18 days for it to reach the moon, 20 years to reach the sun, 80 years to reach Jupiter, 750 years to reach the orbit of Pluto, and 5 million years to reach the next star. Of course, NASA's interplanetary probes travel faster than 500 miles per hour. The Milky Way has over approximately 300 billion stars or suns. So how many stars are there in the entire universe? Well, there are over 125 billion galaxies in our observable universe, and we cannot see all of the universe. That means there are over 35,000 billion stars in our observable universe, more stars than there are grains of sand on all the beaches of Earth. The human mind is not capable of grasping numbers this large. The Milky Way formed about 1 billion years or so after the Big Bang. NASA decided a few years ago to stare at an empty patch of sky for about 10 days. The tiny patch was the size of a tennis ball seen at 100 yards. Over 3,000 new galaxies were detected during that study. The light from these objects had been traveling to us for over 12 billion years. Even more amazing than the presence of billions of galaxies in the universe is the way they're organized at the highest level. This is a picture of a network of supercluster filaments of galaxies in our universe. Every point of light in this picture is not a star, it's an entire galaxy. We now know that galaxies are strung together in gigantic filament-like threads, all held together by dark matter. The largest of these superclusters is the Hercules Corona Boreal supercluster that's 10 billion light years from Earth. And the size of this object, the largest object in the universe as far as we know, is over 7.2 billion light years across. This is a distance well beyond our ability to comprehend. Our own universe, our own Milky Way rather, belongs to a supercluster called Laniakea. The Laniakea supercluster is 520 million light years across, and I want to play a short video that contains some jaw-dropping facts about this rather recent discovery of our own supercluster that the Milky Way belongs to.
Somewhere in the universe is a small blue planet, the third rock from a star called the Sun, just one of billions of stars in a spiral galaxy known as the Milky Way. But where in the universe is the Milky Way? A team of scientists gathered data on more than 8,000 of the galaxies that surround us. They mapped each galaxy's position and movement in space. And, for the first time, they've shown that the Milky Way is part of a much larger system of galaxies, a supercluster that they have named Laniakea. The Milky Way is nested in the furthest reaches of this structure, on the outskirts. The entire universe can be seen as an intricate network of galaxies, a cosmic web. Some areas are almost empty, dark voids. Others are densely packed with galaxies in regions known as superclusters. Superclusters are the biggest structures found in the universe, but scientists have struggled to define where one ends and another begins. To map our home supercluster, a team led by Brent Tully at the University of Hawaii studied the motions of the galaxies around us in unprecedented detail. Even though the entire universe is expanding rapidly, gravity is also at work, pulling against this acceleration. By discounting cosmic expansion, the team worked out which galaxies are being pulled towards us, shown in blue, and which are being pulled away, shown in red. This enabled them to create a map of cosmic flows, the paths that galaxies migrate along, tugged at a tiny pace by the force of gravity. Using this motion, they came up with a new way to map the distribution of matter in the universe. Delving into our home supercluster, you can see that most galaxies are being pulled towards a dense centre. This is known as the Great Attractor. Our galaxy is among those sliding towards this patch of space, which dominates our region of the universe. Let's take a different view. Each circle represents a galaxy. Again, we can see most galaxies being pulled towards the Great Attractor in the direction of the arrows. Between the Great Attractor and us, the Milky Way, there's a relatively empty area, a blue void. And next to us is Virgo, a large and dense cluster whose bright galaxies have been observed from Earth for centuries. Until now, astronomers grouped us, the Milky Way and its surrounding galaxies, with Virgo and nearly 100 other clusters in a supercluster that stretches 100 million light years across. But using this new technique, we can see that this is just the tip of the iceberg. This cluster of clusters is merely an appendage of a much larger supercluster, more than 100 times bigger and more massive. But how did the team know how to redraw the boundaries of this cosmic map? Here's our supercluster in black, and a neighbouring structure, Perseus Pisces, in red. Scientists defined the boundary as the points where the flows of galaxies diverge, like water dividing at a watershed. This is where neighbouring structures shear apart. This is the first clear definition of a supercluster. Laniakea means immeasurable heaven in Hawaiian, a fitting name for the vast community of galaxies that we are a part of. So now we know that on the edge of a supercluster called Laniakea, In a galaxy called the Milky Way, around a star we call the Sun, there is a small blue planet, our home.
You may have heard that if the Big Bang expansion had been slightly larger or slightly smaller, we would not exist, nor would our solar system exist. That might lead you to ponder whether creationism is onto something or not. Before you go down that road, consider that we don't know how many Big Bang experiments have occurred. Maybe we're just one of infinitely many. Perhaps the universe sprang from a random event, just as in a perfect vacuum, virtual particles spring in and out of existence. Or perhaps we live in a 3D world that is part of a super universe that has more than 3 spatial dimensions. That is just another of the wonderful questions of our new universe story, a story that's filled with awe and mystery. Stars are not all created equal. The life of a star is inversely proportional to its size. That is to say, small stars live a long time. There are some stars, small stars, that have been in existence almost since the 13.8 billion years of our universe. Other massive supergiant stars burn for only a few million years. Our own sun, a modest-sized star, will burn for about 10 billion years. Our sun is about halfway through its life. Some stars the size of our sun will burn out and become white or black dwarfs. These are dense, burned-out objects about the size of the Earth. Larger stars, up to 3 times the size of our sun, become neutron stars. Some that are many times the size of our sun become dense objects called black holes. There's a giant black hole at the center of our own galaxy, the Milky Way. But stars play a key role in the emergence and the evolution of the universe. They also have a key role in the evolution of life itself. As some giant stars burn out, they become what are called supernovae. Under the incredibly intense pressure of its collapsing core, a supernova explodes. The atoms, as it explodes under that intense pressure and temperature, all the atoms on the periodic chart above carbon are created. It then spews out into space all of its burned out contents, the iron, sulfur, lead, all the heavier elements needed to form new heavenly bodies. These supernovas are the mother stars of the universe. All of this debris from an exploding supernova, the mother star, soars into space as the dying star sheds its corpse to provide the raw materials for new forms, new planets, new moons, and new solar systems, and the eventual development of life itself. In fact, we ourselves are nothing more than stardust. Practically every atom in our bodies has passed through the core of a supernova. We came from the interior of a star, and someday the atoms of our bodies will return to the interior of a star. Carl Sagan said, "We are the local embodiment of a cosmos grown to self-awareness. We have begun to contemplate our origins, star stuff, pondering the stars." Whereas Michael Dowd puts it in a slightly more comical way. He says, "Romantics are made of stardust, but cynics are made of nuclear waste of worn-out stars." I want to end by reading this beautiful quotation from Desjardins. "You are not a human being in search of a spiritual experience. You are a spiritual existence being immersed in a human experience." So this morning, in a very short time, we came about 9 billion years. Next week, we will continue. The arrow, that arrow, shows, oh, you don't see that. Okay. The vertical arrow shows where we are. And next week, we will continue from that point to the present day. So in part 1, and I have several questions that we might ponder, or I hope we'll have a conversation among us about this material. Does this story have a spiritual component for you? And if so, how are you affected by that? Does God have a hand in this process? And if so, how? And then I raised the question, are you attributing to God the things we do not know yet? Or that is to say, do you have a God of the gaps concept? Or other things? So the floor is now open for discussion.
Person who was at a lecture similar to this.
Oh, yeah, question.
The
Raise your hand.
speaker said that our sun would burn out in about 5 billion years. And the guy held up his hand and said, how long? And he said 5 billion years. He said, I thought you said 5 million. But I think we all either are blessed or cursed by our feelings of immortality in life, not necessarily in the cosmos. And so it's kind of hard to
Yeah.
I really appreciate particularly your comments about the dimension of time and how we have to deal with that, but yet we don't seem to deal with it very well in many ways. And I'm wondering if one of the gaps that we're looking at is there a way that we can revisit the past or that we can visit the future? It seems very odd that we can't, but that's all I had to say about it.
I don't know if that merits amen.
Well, we're going to visit the past a little bit when we see the film that Nick's putting together for us today. The other comment I would make about your comment about time, and I made the comment last week and Ernie made it again today, is that in deep time, when we're talking about billions of years, we have an emergent process, a creative process at every stage, and we are a part of that long creative process, and we are an emergent creativity of the universe itself. And in a spiritual sense, we can see ourselves in that way. And I think that's where the spiritual experience comes in from my perspective. Brian, you had a comment?
I firmly believe that a better understanding of science helps us to better understand our faith or improve theology. And one thing you said this morning to start out the lecture was the one constant in this universe is change. And that reminded me of the quote that I think Tom used from Science of Religion #1 by Albert Einstein, and I'm paraphrasing, but change must come about from a higher level of consciousness. Change cannot come from the same level of consciousness that created the problem or the issue. And so I think that's an aid to better understanding our God of a both transcendent and immanent nature, a panentheistic understanding of God, because God is this, one way of better understanding God is a higher level of consciousness.
Any response to Brian's comment there? That's a very famous quote of Einstein's, by the way. Someone else? Brian again.
Well, again, integrating theology with the science that you discussed today, I really enjoyed your discussion of emergence and paraphrasing. And you said something like the creation of something more from something. Yeah, and to me that relates to God created man in his image. God has that transcendent nature and immanent nature, and I think that's helps you better understand man in distinguishing man from the rest of God's creation. And it's consistent with the scientific theory of evolution.
Okay. Joe.
One of the questions, God of the gap, is an interesting concept, but I would hate for that to be the case, because as those gaps get filled in, God diminishes. And when there are no more gaps, then there will be no more gods. So I think that, to me, God is not a God of the gaps, but is a God of all of it.
Thank you, Joe. Someone else?
How do you get something for nothing?
Nothing but. I don't know. That's a very good question, Dick. That's one of the mysteries. Some of the recent physics is pretty fascinating. One of the theories about how it all started was that if you've read some of the lay literature in science, you probably know that if you take a vacuum and you pump everything out of it and you make the most perfect vacuum that you can create with the best instruments, that vacuum has a density that's like millions and millions of times more than it should. And the reason it does is because there are all these particles that pop into existence and then go away, pop into existence. There's a froth of particle creation and destruction in a perfect vacuum. It's not, I don't think it's well understood. I'm not a physicist, but one of the theories is that the whole Big Bang system came about from that kind of process. I'm not answering your question because I don't know the answer to it, but I'm just saying that there's we just don't know. There are a lot of theories, and we're finding out more and more about some of these fundamental particles. The Higgs boson, as you know, was discovered. The Higgs may give us some idea about what dark matter is. We don't know that quite yet. Maybe next year when they fire up a Large Hadron Collider and at a higher energy, we may get more information. But it's an ongoing saga, but we've now gotten so many pieces in the last 20 years of this story that it kind of is coming together as this incredible story of creation that's amazing. And for me, as a personal testimony, I find it so compelling. I think the beauty of the Genesis story is without a doubt, is undeniable. But the awe and the mystery of the science story is even more, for me, mysterious and incredible. It has a very deep spiritual component for me. And we'll talk more next week because we're going to move on into get to where life is created. And what you'll see next week, and I'm jumping ahead a little bit, is how very recent we are as a species. We were just created yesterday, not even yesterday. And there's no doubt that we will not be here that long, us Homo sapiens. We will pass because evolution is going like a freight train today as we live in this particular era. Annihilation of species is happening. Humans are having a huge impact on the planet. And so there's no doubt that change is more than ever. The climate is changing. Everything is changing very quickly.
It seems that many of or that most of the things that we've talked about have progressed from simpler to more complex, whether it's on a galactic scale or whether it's on a life evolutionary scale. Is there a reverse to that going on that we've observed anywhere in nature or anywhere in the universe where things digress from more complicated to simple.
Well, I think the supernova is an example of that. It explodes into simple parts and gets reformed. I think that whole recreation process is very much in evidence. But we think at least that our brains is one of the most complicated things that's been created in at least on our planet so far, and it's very complex. And but you know, trees have more than twice as many chromosomes that we have, so we should be a little bit humble, I think.
You know, the way we organized the series is Ernie's talking about the origins of life and the origins of the universe, the origin of life, and I'm talking about human evolution. But then we get to spiritual evolution, and I'm confident that Ben Marshall is going to answer many of those questions in the last part of this series. So not to lay any heavy burden on Ben, but that's the direction we're headed. Now, I'm sure he will also depend very much upon this audience to contribute to that dialogue about what all of this means from the spiritual experience and the spiritual evolution points. Anyway, that's the direction that the program is headed anyway. Jan.
As a child that grew up pre-pollution and staring at the Milky Way, I'm glad to learn the update on where we are within the Milky Way. And on that fringe, seemingly of the exchange of being attracted and those two images, it reminds me of the circulatory system within the body. It reminds me of a tree and its branches and its roots. It reminds me of a simple leaf and its branching. So it's just mind-boggling.
You know, it's interesting you say that, because when I first showed that supercluster thing to a group, somebody pointed out that the supercluster networks look a lot like the microscope slides of a neural network of a human sample of the human brain. So there are these patterns in nature at the super macro level all the way down to the microscopic level that seem to be repeated. Was that coincidence? I have no idea, but it certainly is there. And I wanted to say too, I wanted to second what Tom says. We've just begun today. We have a lot of miraculous stuff to talk about, and I have more next week. Tom will have several weeks of talking about the whole history of the human culture and the evolution of society and evolution of the mind. And so we got a long way to go, and so it could be that these questions I've posed are premature, but something to think about in the coming weeks.
We like premature questions. Philip.
They're not premature. I think I heard the Higgs referred to as the God particle or something like that.
Some say that. I didn't say that.
Why do they say that?
Why do they say that? Well, I think most physicists abhor that term. And I'm not a physicist. I don't care. I don't have a hog in that fight either. But I think what they mean is it was the missing piece of the standard model that physics has for all of the fundamental particles, and it was that one big missing piece, and they couldn't find it, and now they think they found it, so somebody coined it the God particle as explaining everything. I think that's what they meant. But physicists hate that term.
Probably because it made good press.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
I just had a comment about something Joe said a minute ago, and when we first were looking at these, I was sort of liking that idea of God of the gaps, and Joe thought that was diminishing God in that sense. I sort of looked at it differently, because so many things over the history of science, and especially in the 20th century, last 300 or 400 years included though, when we learn more, we begin to learn so much more about what we don't know. So I'm not sure the gaps are necessarily diminishing God. I think they're actually expanding the potential for God there for all of us, for all human beings. I mean, we've seen this with the advent of I think what we've learned from the Hubble telescope. We've gotten away from the Earth and moved to deep space. At one time, even in my lifetime, we thought space was expanding, but eventually would contract again. And that was a major theory. And now it appears that that expansion is continuing to go on and on at a more rapid pace. And that's a new way of looking at it. Another thing is the dark matter, dark energy idea. This is something that's relatively new, but we didn't even come across this idea until fairly recently. So, I understand where Joe is coming from there, but I don't know, I just think the wonder of the universe, as Einstein said, that the miracle in everything is just expanding potential for God. You know, I've been a student and a teacher of mathematics for years, and the patterns that we see are so ever present everywhere. And we don't always understand how they fit, but they're there. This is not absolutely random. I think the more and more we understand, the more we'll be able to understand the potential for God.
To ponder is, does God have a hand in this process? And when I say process, I'm talking with respect to the theory, the scientific theory of evolution. So I'm going to ask you, as a man of science, how would you answer that question? And if I can, ask the question another way, in case you might, which I don't think you do, believe that God does not have a hand in this process, is the follow-up question being, why is there something rather than nothing? Why is there creation rather than nothing if God does not have a hand?
Well, I would just say, I don't know. I don't know. And you asked me what I thought. I really don't know. I don't have a compelling answer to that question except to stand in the mystery and stand in the unknown. And I guess the only thing I would say in a discussion of God of the gaps, I find that a limiting, if you have a God of the gaps type of theology, I think that's limiting. It's a limiting theology for me. That's just me. That's my opinion. But as far as God's hand in this, I don't know. It's a mystery. Yeah, I would hope that whatever we do, we have a conversation. We're certainly not here to try to convince anybody of anything except maybe the science. We're trying to convince you some of the science, but I think what we're trying to do is to create a rich conversation and a process through this series where people re-examine what they think about God and what they think about their religion and how they incorporate this era of science that we live in. How do you incorporate that into your theology, your religious beliefs?